big timing us. Isaac's big timing us.
He's not big timing us.
He's totally big timing us.
No, he's not.
Isaac's dead to me.
He's just a leech on someone who's more successul.
Fighting words to start off episode 286 of the In the Tank podcast. We're going to be talking about the Great Reset, and maybe if we have time, the dollar being doomed. We'll see if we can get to that. We'll see if we can fit that in. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal, joined by Justin Haskins, editorial director at the Heartland Institute. You haven't been here in several weeks. How are you, good sir?
I haven't been anywhere in several weeks. That's
a lie.
Actually, that's not true. I have been somewhere in several weeks for the first time in a long time. It feels like several weeks, but the last couple of weeks I've been locked away working on a book, mostly, and it has been incredibly time consuming. So that's been my life.
Jim Likely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you?
I am just fine. I am not working on a book. So I have lots of free time, and in my free time, I actually checked out this new show on Netflix. It released on March 12th. It's called The One. Anybody who likes Black Mirror?
Oh, is Jet Li in it?
No, Jet Li is not in it. That's a different The One, or a different movie, I think. No, this is actually one of those like the show Black Mirror, how it kind of presents a alternative or a possible very near future of technology kind of taking over our lives in ways that, and trying to deal with the advancement of technology and how it affects us as people. Well, The One is in that genre, and it says that in the near future they could use a DNA test to find the perfect love match for you, so that there is actually a soulmate for you somewhere out there in the world, and there's a DNA test that can determine who that person is. And what's really interesting is that it goes through all of the, so what if you're not married to the one? It's like the introduction of this technology. And so it's actually pretty fascinating. Plus it has a little bit of a murder mystery going on in the as part of the plot too. So I have 2 more episodes to go, but I'm enjoying it.
Well, I canceled Netflix, so thanks for the suggestion.
For those who still have it.
That kind of dystopian future thing kind of ties into the main theme of this episode, which is the Great Reset. As anyone that is a frequent listener of this podcast knows, that this is a concept that Justin and I have been talking about for several months now. In fact, I would say that we're leading the charge on it. We've been working with Glenn Beck on this a lot. We've actually worked with him a lot, even when on his special shows that he does about this topic. Justin already kind of alluded to some work that we're already doing with him on this topic. So we thought that it's about time, especially after being in Dallas with Glenn Beck for a week. It's about time that we do kind of a refresher on this. And it's more than a refresher, I would say, because one thing that happens when you're writing about something that's happening now is there's constantly new things that are popping up. So in the past several weeks and even months, there's just been new stories popping up about this Great Reset. And Justin, you can expound on this too. It's just like when we started talking about this, it was very theoretical. We were talking about all of these people with these quotes talking about how the world needs a great reset and everything needs to be a great reset. It was just kind of creepy that all of these powerful people, from Prince Charles to Klaus Schwab, talking about the same terms, throwing these same terms around. That's what caught our attention, and that's what started our kind of path, our way down this path. But now, and I've got a number of stories lined up here that we're going to talk about, but it seems like this is more than theoretical now, Justin. Yeah. But before we get into any of those stories, we should probably do a little elevator pitch, quick summary of the Great Reset for those people that aren't constant listeners of this podcast, but keep it short because I don't want to, bore everyone that already knows.
Right. So there's essentially 2 parts to this movement among many of the most powerful people in the world. The first part is big, gigantic social programs. Okay, we've got the Green New Deal, we've got a government jobs guarantee, we've got big regulatory changes and tax increases and all of that. That's the first big part. That's the one with the really big price tag associated with it. And you might be tempted to think that's really what this is all about. When you first start looking at it, it's really easy to get caught up in all of that. And I understand why. That was something that I was attracted to initially, wanting to understand those parts of this whole movement. But over time, what we've learned is that the second part is really probably the most interesting, I think, and also the most complex and the most important. This is where the big grand changes of society are really going to take place. And it's this thing called Environmental, Social, and Governance Standards, ESG scores, ESG system. This is a complete transformation of the way that the global economy works. And the sort of the bare bones of how this would work is, instead of evaluating companies, businesses, based on your traditional market economic ideas, like how good your products are, how good your services are, how much money you make, how well, what you pay your employees, all those kinds of things that you would normally think of when you think of a business. You have all those things, plus you have a whole bunch of other things built into this system, into this framework. And those things that are built into this other framework, which has a whole scoring system associated with it. There's a lot of different ways these scoring systems work, but they could be anything that's in there. Right now, there's the ESG systems that we're looking at. Most of them have things like, in your supply chain, what's the percentage of XYZ minority group that's in management in your supply chain? Or how much CO2 emissions are associated with your supply chain? How much land do you consume with your various buildings? There are literally hundreds of categories and subcategories and potential categories and things that people have talked about and suggested categories. It goes on and on and on. But the idea here is they want to create a new framework for evaluating companies and then tie incentives and disincentives to that system so that the good companies in society are rewarded and the bad companies, which is just whatever the ruling class wants those bad companies to be defined as, they get punished in some way.
Yeah, so I think the best way to kind of keep this in your head is just like it's like the Chinese social credit score. Right? Like we've talked about that. That was kind of in the news for a big period of time, where the government of China was giving all of their citizens a social credit score. And you could raise or lower your social credit score depending on if you obey the laws or make sure you go to the right websites and you don't participate in any like anti-government rhetoric or anything like that, and they'll raise or lower your score depending on how you act as a citizen. And then depending on how high or low your score is, you have access to different social programs, or like you could buy houses in certain areas or be able to go on mass transit. If it's too low, you're cut off, right? So it's like that idea, social credit score, but being applied to businesses around the country, international corporations. And yeah, like Justin was saying, these metrics, which we've actually covered pretty extensively on this podcast in a past episode, they range from environmental stuff, social stuff, and governance stuff. So a lot of it, of the environmental stuff, obviously has to do with climate change. Some of the social and governance things, and maybe I'm mixing them up, that have to do with like your traditional social justice warrior type stuff. Make sure that you have underrepresented transgendered people in management, and all the like stuff that you could possibly imagine is in this. And yeah, so what Jim has right up here is actually a personal social credit score. This is a screenshot from a colleague of ours that signed into their like investment portfolio, and he was shocked to find that he had his own personal social credit score. So it's not just for businesses anymore, apparently. It's based on the investments that he made in his investment account.
Yeah, so they took the ESG scores that he made a bit from the companies that he is invested in, and then created a composite ESG score for his account personally.
Yeah, so he's got a 4.7. So he's definitely
By the way,
It's average. It's average.
By the way,
I guess it's not so
below
bad.
average.
well, it's below average slightly, but what I don't understand is like if you look at the categories at the top, for those of you who don't see it on your screen right now because you're listening to us on iTunes or something, he gets a score in 3 different categories. He has an environmental score of 6. He has a 6.0 out of 10. He has a social score of 4.7, and he has a governance score of 4.6. And somehow the overall score is 4.7. Well, I don't understand that.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. How does 4.7 and 4.6 equal 4.7? I don't even understand that. It doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, so they must not be weighted perfectly because he should have a 5.1. I just did the math. I've got a calculator. But so
they wanted to make sure he was below average. It's rigged.
Yeah. So anyways, all of these corporations, and this is just kind of like a side thing. I was going to get to this a little bit later, but Jim jumped the gun. That's okay. But these corporations are all given these ESG scores, and like Justin said, a corporation is no longer trying to just provide the best goods and services to make the most amount of money and customers happy. Now their main priority is going to make sure that their ESG score is higher, right? And it's just like, well, why? Why? In fact, we had a representative reach out and say that, like, oh, this personal ESG score that your colleague has really has no bearing. There's no punishment or anything like that.
By
so
representative, he means representative from one of these very large banks.
That's true.
Involved in all of this.
That is true. Yeah. So that kind of begs the question: if these corporations have a low or high ESG score, like, what does that matter? So, Justin, can you fill in that one for us?
Right. Well, there's a few different ways that this matters. The first is that there is this massive. For this whole framework has been built. We're now discovering over a very long period of time. This has been built over a decade, and maybe even longer. Probably over a decade. Okay, and it's gone through all sorts of different names and everything else. Sustainable investment is one way that it has historically been referred to. Inclusive investment. I've seen all sorts of different things, but essentially the main driving force behind this is there's an expectation among people who have bought into this ESG system that at some point in time in the future, and we believe we're reaching that point in time now, government is going to tie its funding, whether that's government bailouts of companies, whether that's investments and contracts that it makes, whether it's any kind of funding that you can imagine, stimulus money, whatever, they're going to tie this to ESG scores or something similar to that. Okay, so that's the first reason why we think a lot of these companies are buying into it. The second is that there's this expectation among many of these big businesses that have started to build these ESG systems that there's going to be regulations put into place that essentially requires this in some fashion. And very recently, we've seen people at the Securities and Exchange Commission here in the United States, which is responsible for regulating the stock market and that sort of thing, all kinds of investment activity, start to talk about regulations related to ESG companies. And in fact, they just appointed very recently under Joe Biden a new position in the SEC that's responsible for looking at ESG scores. That's its primary job. So there's a regulatory approach because this is also going on in Europe and in other parts of the world as well, especially in Europe. So there's the expectation of regulations. And then there's another part of this as well. And that is that there's all this money that's being pumped into this system from investors who believe that this system is inevitable because they think that government is going to impose it or heavily incentivize this, coerce businesses essentially to adopt it. And so there's all these investors that have put trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, or they've committed to putting trillions of dollars into companies that adopt these ESG systems, and then to reward the companies that do well with this ESG model, and then to withhold funds from the companies that refuse to go into this ESG system. But they're only doing this with the expectation, again, that government's going to impose this in some fashion and pump lots of money into the system. And so there's this sort of interconnectedness between, you could even say collusion, if you wanted to use that word, between big, gigantic banks big, gigantic financial institutions, central banks, government, and big corporations and investors all working together to all get filthy rich off of this system and to require society to move in the direction that these people all want to move, whatever that means, using this ESG framework as the mechanism for making those changes in society happen, so that you don't have to pass a law that says no more guns. All you have to do is build this framework that says investors, government, all these people are only banks. They're only going to provide money to companies that don't do business with people that have anything to do with guns.
Yeah,
and now you don't have to ban guns. You've literally just defunded the whole, gun manufacturing and selling industry overnight just by taking the money away from it and by refusing to let them be in the stock exchanges. That's the system that's happening.
All you have to do is add a metric into this ESG score that has like how involved is your business, indirectly or directly, with gun manufacturing. As soon as they put that metric in, and you have, you giving out a bank or something like that, giving out loans to gun manufacturers or anything that has to do with guns, and that lowers their score, suddenly they're incentivized to cut off of that business.
Right. And there's already big, gigantic index funds like the S&P 500, the same group that does the S&P 500 and the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which everybody has heard of, if you've had anything to do with the stock market at all. They have an S&P 500 ESG index fund. And they have excluded from that anyone who has anything to do with weapons manufacturing. They've already done that. They don't even let you in. They don't even give you an ESG score. They exclude you right from the very start and say, nope, you're involved with guns, you're out. So it's already happened in that sense. Yeah.
Jim, so you're obviously not a layman when it comes to all of this. So we've talked about this. We've done some things at Heartland about the Great Reset, but certainly you're not as immersed in all of this as Justin and I. So just jump in. Is there anything that we're losing you, or you think maybe we're losing the audience on anything? Is there anything that we can talk about to clarify anything so far?
Well, to me, it just seems like it's pretty much the end of the private sector as a independent entity separate from government coercion. I mean, the old saw, I don't know if it's an old saw, but libertarians used to say and conservatives used to say, and pretty accurately, that there's no reason to fear the power of corporations more than the government, because a corporation doesn't have the power to tax you or take away your rights or put you in jail. Only governments can do those sorts of things. But those kind of distinctions are looking a lot less clear cut these days, when corporations are so much in bed with government and increasingly global governance. Has really, nations don't mean anything anymore. Everything about this ESG stuff goes back to the Great Reset, which is a global initiative, which is supported by all the wealthy nations of the West. So it's not like the corporations can arrest you yet. We don't live in RoboCop land like the movie, where a corporation has taken over policing and will arrest you for doing bad things. But we do now are increasingly living in a society with these ESG scores, in which your basically your freedom, or the market's ability to impact or to drive, frankly, the financial markets, is being usurped by governments directing how the financial system in the world will work. If you can't, if you can't get an ESG score, if you invest in a firearms manufacturer or in an oil company or in a natural gas company or anything like that, and not having an ESG score or having a low ESG score, means that you are discriminated against when it comes to getting loans or engaging in any way in commerce. That's not good, and that's certainly not free market. So this whole idea that you shouldn't fear corporations as much as the government, as I said, that line is really starting to blur, because as I think I've said in another context, it is pretty scary to see basically corporations volunteering, because they're going to make a profit on it. That's why they're doing this, but volunteering to be the enforcement arm of leftist controlling government. And that's very scary, but that's where we're going. And it's happening very fast, and almost nobody is paying any attention except you guys.
Well, one of the things that's really fueling this is the idea, and don't roll your eyes when I say this, modern monetary theory, because originally, like you said, the conservative libertarian thing, you don't have to worry too much about a corporation. They care about serving you more, right? Like they need you. They need the consumer to actually buy their products and all of this stuff. Well, in a world where the government can print unlimited amounts of money and feed it to any through bailouts or stimulus or anything like that to any businesses that are carrying water for it, then the business now sees the government as being the most important consumer in this system, right? So the individual consumer is secondary to the government when the government has unlimited amounts of money that they could just print on a whim. So this all does tie back to modern monetary theory. That is the fuel that really makes this engine click.
Well, and the other thing to keep in mind too is that we say government, but in a lot of respects, when we say government, we actually mean the central banks.
Sure.
And in America, it's not necessarily exactly the same thing. Obviously, there's a very close relationship between these two groups. But the Federal Reserve is in this regard is more powerful than the government, because the Federal Reserve is essentially just creating money out of thin air and then just pumping it into the economy. And these people who care about all of this Great Reset stuff, they're the ones who benefit the most from it. They're the ones that get access to this money first. It's these big financial institutions and the big corporations that get money from big financial institutions that get access to all of this money. And so in a lot of ways, the Fed is the one driving all of this by agreeing to print endless amounts of money, by pumping endless amounts of money or seemingly endless amounts of money into the economy through quantitative easing and other things into these financial institutions. They are driving all of this because people want to be a part of those things. The other thing to keep in mind, though, is that, how does this all work in real life? Like, how does this actually look in America? A good example of it is they're talking already now, Joe Biden is, about a new big grand infrastructure plan, green energy infrastructure plan, right? And this is going to be full of all sorts of Green New Deal light type stuff. And if you want to get some of that money, we're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars in just a few years. If you're a corporation and you want to get some of that money, then you have to play ball. You can't be a big corporation and say, well, we're going to do business with fossil fuel companies too. We're just going to do business with everybody. We're just going to do business with everybody. And whoever has the best, business model, makes the most money, is the best financially for us, we're just going to do business with them. Instead of doing that, they're going to say, well, if I want to get some of that money from the government, that's part of all of this, green energy financing, then I'm green energy infrastructure. I'm going to buy into all of this stuff. I'm going to make sure that I'm on the right side of history, so to speak, because I want access to this massive amounts of cash. And so it really is, it's cronyism on steroids. Mm-hmm. And the modern monetary theory part is important because in the past, this kind of thing was happening too, right? This has been going on forever. But the difference was there was a limit. There's only so much money the government can spend because at the end of the day, in order to get more of it, they had to tax somebody, right? And so if you had to tax somebody, that means you're making somebody angry. And if you're making that person angry, then, or you're causing job losses, you're causing economic problems, you're doing all of these things that's creating problems for you politically. You're not going to do it. You're going to put a limit on it, right? And so there was a break on how much of this cronyism could exist. And that break was how much the political system was willing, or how much the populace was willing to be taxed. That was right. The break. But now that doesn't exist because they don't increase taxes when they spend more money. When was the last time they increased taxes? They never increase taxes anymore. It's like the 90s since they increased taxes on a large scale. But they've spent increasingly more money over that period of time. So what are they doing? They're printing the money. They're inventing it. They don't even print it. It's all electronic. They just invent it on a spreadsheet somewhere in the Fed. And we don't even know who these people are. And that's the system that we have now. That's what's driving all of this. And at some point in time, the corporation said, well, gee, we would like to get some of that money. We need that money. And if we need that money, we better make sure that the people who are producing that money are happy. And when those people came out and said, you know what, this is what we want this whole new ESG system, we want to make sure that you're all doing the things that we decide are right for the world, then they said, okay, well, whatever's going to get us that money. If you're telling us that's what we need, then I guess that's what we'll do. And that's the system that we are now seeing come into full force. And for the longest time, because again, this has been going on for a decade or more to varying degrees, for the longest time, nobody noticed These
Yeah.
systems were being built, and these gigantic
Right.
corporations and public policy people like us just weren't paying attention to it. And now all of a sudden we're learning this has been going on forever. And there must be some reason why these corporations are all signing up for this ESG thing. It can't just be because they are, all of a sudden, good citizens of the world who care about it. No, of course not. They are going to make money. We know that. There's been promises to them to that effect. We can't prove it in the sense that we could show a piece of paper somewhere that somebody sent an email that said, oh yeah, if you do this, you're going to make all kinds of money. But we can show all sorts of investment groups and people who are involved in this who have said essentially that.
Right.
Like, hey, you guys want to make a lot of money? Sign up for this whole ESG thing and invest in these ESG companies because they're going to get a whole bunch of money from the government.
Yeah,
We found that.
Yeah.
So we know what's happening.
And to think of it, and again, getting back to like how a free market operates and how actual capitalism operates, and how what's going on here operates. It's the difference between, the free market is basically water, a river, digging its own path, finding its own way. The most efficient and best way to get down that mountain, the water will find it. It'll just happen, and it does it on its own automatically. But you can actually steer that water the way you want it by putting barriers in place, by putting chutes over here, by building a dam, or to mix a metaphor here, these global leaders don't like the way society is operating right now, and they have tried for decades, for 100 years, since really the beginning of the progressive project in the early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s. They have basically wanted to form society in their ideal, whatever that ideal is. And basically that ideal is you do what you're told. And, they don't like freedom. People free to do what they want are problematic. And, they will not go into the box you want them to go into. And so you have to basically forge a new world. And so, we are, we're the metal that's on the anvil, and they're the hammer, right? And so they're going to be pounding society into what they want it to be instead of what we want it to be, or what society would have it to be on its own, left to its own devices. And that's why, and these guys will make money. But this is what do they call it, Justin? It's like, it's not, because what we have right now, or kind of what we have right now, is free market capitalism. What was the term that they were going to use? Something.
Right. They have their vision of capitalism. They have two different ways of looking. They call shareholder capitalism. They would say that's what the existing model is. And they mean that in a very sort of mocking kind of way. And then they have stakeholder capitalism, which is the other kind of capitalism that they say that they want, where we care about the stakeholder. We put the stakeholders first. Stakeholders just means everybody. Basically. It's just a collective capitalism.
Mostly them, and the people that agree with them.
Well, they're stakeholders. Yes.
That's
yes.
right.
That's that. Well, and that's the
no,
thing.
No. They say that it's for everybody, and that they're taking everybody that has impacted by any of these corporations into account. But in reality, it's them at the top making the rules.
Well, but but that's the thing, right? It's like, yeah, they call it stakeholder capitalism because they care about the stakeholders. But when was the last time, I don't know, have you guys been to Davos? Are you at the dinner parties with George Soros and Klaus Schwab? Like, no, I'm not. No one's inviting me. Am I not a stakeholder? Why don't I have access?
I did try to sneak in through the bushes, but they caught me.
Yeah, you and Alex Jones together, I'm sure.
When they get to decide who the stakeholders are, guess what? You're not among them. Unless you've already been picked, unless you've got the card in the mail, or the special text or signal message, right. You're not in it. So if we're talking to all you guys who are not in it, which is basically 99.7% of the entire country world.
Right. And this is all part of, and I don't think we should go into necessarily all this evidence. We've done this before that shows that, Joe Biden is linked to all of this stuff. You just have to trust me. He is, without question. But just look at what happened when they killed all of those, when they killed the Keystone XL pipeline, and they killed all of the potential jobs from drilling on federal lands and all of that, basically right away. That was like one of the first things that Joe Biden did when he came into office, right? And then when they asked John Kerry about it, and they said, what about all these jobs that you guys just killed? You guys killed, thousands and thousands of jobs. Like, what do you have to say about that? And his response was, well, they can get jobs doing solar panels at some point in the future, right? Like, that was his answer. And it's like, that's the Great Reset mindset. That's the mindset. It's like, we've decided that these jobs over here are not worth having. because of XYZ reason. We don't like them. And so what we're going to do is destroy them. And then don't worry, we'll take care of you. We'll make sure that you're okay because we'll create other jobs off into the future. Where and when and how, we don't know, but don't worry about it. We'll take care of you. And it's that very sort of paternalistic kind of thing where it's like, yes, we're destroying your job. Yes, you're financially ruined, but we'll take care of you down the road at some other point in time. Meanwhile, John Kerry is flying around in private jets and he's, hundreds of millions heir or whatever he is. And he doesn't, this doesn't affect him or impact him or anything like that. Of course not. But that's how they look at they're doing what's best for the world, for the planet, for whatever the cause is. And that's the important thing is it's not just a left-wing thing. It happens to be primarily a left-wing thing right now. But the truth is it's whatever is best for them, right? It could be anything. At some point in time, maybe that's something else. It could be anything. Whatever benefits them is how this system is going to operate. It's not really about, this left-wing cause or that right-wing cause or what. It doesn't matter what it is as long as the system is designed to benefit them. Once all the windmills and solar panels are built, they'll move on to something else and it'll be some other cause. And maybe that will benefit the left. Maybe it will benefit the right, but it will definitely benefit the ruling class. And that's ultimately what this is really all about. It's not a left versus right thing, even though parts of it definitely feel that way. That's not what it is. This is every man walking down the street, Main Street, America, Main Street, Brussels, Main Street, just everywhere in the world. It's your average, regular, everyday person versus the people pulling the levers of society, the people who are in the elite, the bankers, the big corporations, the big, powerful, wealthy people. And that's why you don't see, by the way, Bernie Sanders hanging out in Davos. Right. Why isn't he invited? If they like the Green New Deal, where's Bernie? Bernie's everywhere else. Why isn't he in Davos? Why isn't AOC in Davos? Has anyone noticed that? Yeah. It's because they don't want that either. They want a bunch of socialist stuff, but they don't want Davos people running things.
Even when Greta was invited to Davos, that was her speech of the "How dare you!" Like, why are you guys just sitting there doing nothing?
Exactly. See, and that's the thing, right? They invited Greta to Davos to promote their agenda, and Greta gets up there and basically says, "You guys are a bunch of clowns. You're horrible people. You're horrible people." And she shamed all of them, right? And so, that wasn't part of the plan, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, the one thing that you brought up was that this has been in the works for years, decades even, right? And it's I think that flew under our radar even when we first started this. This was just oh man, if they started getting all of this stuff into place, what can stop them? And then we wake up one day and just oh, they actually have so much of this in place already. So a couple of things that kind of lead to that was even this. Several episodes ago, maybe a dozen plus episodes ago, we went through the ESG metrics that were being proposed by the World Economic Forum. And it was 50 different metrics for each one of these pillars, the environmental, social, governance, all of these things. And we were joking about how can you even keep track of all of this stuff? How is a corporation supposed to know, their downstream in their supply chain, how much, water consumption and all of it? How are you supposed to keep track of all of this stuff, right?
Well, so I want to know, how do they even determine what your score is? I mean, what's the scale? What are the rules? Do any of the people getting these scores even know what the rules are? What's a demerit and what's a positive, and how much they're each worth?
Right. Well, I mean, that was part of it. We're just how are they supposed to get all this in place? This seems ridiculous. This isn't about just counting ones and twos and dividing by 3, So it just seemed theoretically impossible for them to even achieve something like this. But then when we were looking around on that colleague of ours' social credit score, if you drill down deep enough, you could see that all of these companies already have ESG scores. And then when we were clicking through the industry, I don't know, corporation that gave them these scores, they have all of the stuff in the works where you can sign up your corporation or business to basically have this system do all the auditing and stuff for you that shows you compared to your peers where you're lagging behind and where you're ahead of your peers when it comes to these different ESG metrics. So there's industries already being built around these concepts.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't theoretical. Like, this is actually happening.
Yeah, when we found those World Economic Forum ESG standards, which were produced by and backed by all the big accounting firms, like Deloitte, for example, and Ernst & Young, and all these different companies, and then they were led by this group that was kind of an offshoot of the World Economic Forum that talked about that's led by all these huge CEOs of these major companies, billion-dollar companies like Bank of America. Brian Moynihan, for example, the CEO of Bank of America, is heavily involved in this. And so we thought this is the thing that they're building, and they're going to try to get all these companies to adopt it. But in reality, that was just them trying to internationalize and standardize it and refine it. It already exists. All these companies already have it. There's every major company that I can find in the world, or almost every major company,
not
already has
Alibaba.
this. Yeah, there are some that don't have it, which is interesting. Google doesn't have it, I noticed. And
China's Alibaba. Yeah.
Alibaba, one of the most powerful companies in the world, top 5 easily. Biggest company in China, I believe. They don't have it. And by the way, the head of Alibaba, Jack Ma, is a board member of the World Economic Forum.
Oh, well, hey.
So how do you, just a coincidence, I'm sure. So anyway, the whole point is, this system has been built and rolled out and refined multiple times over already. It's already in place. All these companies are already doing it. There's already all these big groups coming up with ESG scores. Like I said, there's stock funds of ESG companies. This is already there. It's already in place.
Well, here, so let's see like an actual example of how this is affecting big businesses right now. So, Jim, I've got this. I think you've got this article queued up. This is a Yahoo Finance article. Bank of America announces actions to achieve
This is actually a press release from Bank of America.
Okay, well, go ahead and just walk us through this, Justin. Why is this important here? What is this and why is it important?
So essentially, Bank of America, this is February 2021, Bank of America releases a press release where they talk about how they're going to, they talk about how they're going to change their system and change their goals to embrace net zero greenhouse gas emissions, not just within Bank of America. This is the important part. This isn't a press release telling the world, hey, Bank of America is going green. Like, that's not what this is about. This is about Bank of America saying they are going to try to require everyone who does business with them to also go green, and that they're going to roll this out steadily over the course of the next few decades. Okay. And if you read the press release, there's a part of it where it talks about its longstanding support for the Paris Climate Agreement. Now, that's not about private companies, the Paris Climate Agreement, but they're saying we want to embrace the Paris Climate Agreement goals ourselves as a company. And then it said that they outlined recently, Bank of America outlined initial steps, this is a direct quote, to achieve its goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions. And this is the important part, in its financing activities, operations, and supply chain before 2050. Now, think about this for a minute. This is a bank. So when it says its financing activities, it's talking about who the bank gives money to, who it loans to. This is most of what the bank does is involved in this, right? And its own operations and its supply chain, meaning the people who give them paper at Bank of America also have to be involved in all of this. The people that deliver the water coolers, they're part of the supply chain. Are they part of all of this? Not just in America, but all throughout the entire world. Everywhere that Bank of America is doing business, directly or indirectly, are they engaging in this whole idea of reducing their CO2 emissions and becoming net zero greenhouse gas emissions? That's the idea behind this. So although this isn't specifically, this part of it isn't specifically referencing ESG standards, this is what the ESG system is. This is a good snapshot of it. And later on in the press release, and this is how we know that this is the case, later on in the press release, it then goes on to highlight specifically Brian Moynihan, the CEO of Bank of America. If you scroll down a little bit further, Jim, you'll see it. Brian Moynihan and Bank of America and their connection to the World Economic Forum and groups like the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials and all these other groups, and how they've been involved in ESG standards and they've been involved in pushing for a more sustainable world and all of this other stuff. Those are all Great Reset people, including Brian Moynihan. So this is all part of it. They're not going to come out and make a press release that says this is a part of the Great Reset, because of course it's embarrassing for them to say that now. That whole idea has become toxic, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But they are all in bed with each other. It's all the same people. And the more you see this over and over and over again, the more you'll see it's the same players involved in all these things. Yeah, if you're watching on the screen, you'll see now that one of the bullet points that they're talking about here for how they're involved in the transition to a net zero economy include, and then it says right here, CEO Brian Moynihan serves as co-chair of His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales Sustainable Markets Initiative. The Prince of Wales
Charles.
That's right. It's Prince Charles. He was a co-host of the initial Great Reset rollout in June of 2020. Then it says right after that, the World Economic Forum's International Business Council, World Economic Forum, another big Great Reset person. Under Moynihan's chairmanship, he's leading it, recently released a set of common environmental, social, and governance stakeholder capitalism metrics. This is exactly what we were just talking about. This is all part of the same thing. How is Bank of America making sure that they're a good ESG company? Because they have their own ESG score. I've looked it up. How are they making sure they're a good ESG company? By making sure everyone else is a good ESG company. That's what a good ESG bank does. That's what a good ESG investor does. That's what a good ESG company does. That's the whole point. It's like you're either in the club or you're not in the club. And if you're in the club, we'll all take care of each other. If you're not in the club, you're dead to us. That's essentially how this is all working. And it's slowly being rolled out. You can see this. It's not happening overnight. It's taken years for us to get to this point in time. But now that Donald Trump is gone and you have Joe Biden in office who's going to support all this stuff, and now that you had the COVID pandemic, which created this initial justification for massive money printing, big government programs, tons of funding pumped into the public and private sectors. Now that you have this existential threat of climate change as being positioned as the next big thing after the COVID-19 pandemic ends, everything has been set up perfectly for this to be rolled out now and for us to have a great reset of the global economy. That's why they're doing it now. And they're the one, and I'm not speculating, they're the ones saying, as Prince Charles said, COVID-19 is a, quote, golden opportunity to transform the world and usher in a great reset. See, that's the whole point. The Great Reset is not socialism. The Great Reset is not even liberalism. The Great Reset is about these big companies, these big corporations, these big investors like Larry Fink at BlackRock, all these people, these big governments, all working together to get rich and to manipulate and control society as they see fit. That's fundamentally what I believe it's all about. And again, you don't even have to take my word for it. You can just read their own quotes. I mean, they're openly saying this is what they want to do, and they say the world will be better off for it. And, that's their opinion. They think if we had more power, if we could just manipulate things a little bit more, if you just gave us more money, gave us more authority, have this ESG system, we'll make the world a better place. Yeah. So just trust us. That's the same thing that elites have been doing forever.
Justin, when you mentioned earlier in that great rant, very informative rant, not just a regular rant where you're mad, but like there's a lot of information in there, folks. That was pretty good stuff.
Well, this is my life now.
It's true. But you mentioned that Joe Biden is on board for all of this. And, the Bank of America press release talked about, how they were at the Paris Climate Accord meeting, the COP meeting in Paris in 2015. I was there myself. So was the Heartland Institute, other people there. And I remember it. They were all so happy. There was a great round of applause. John Kerry called it one of the greatest accomplishments in human history. Barack Obama was really excited. All of these, and it was really kind of almost disgusting, kind of sick. It made you feel dirty. All these corporations buying in, all of them, tents and sponsorships and booths. And I mean, it's just like, it was just this incestual relationship. You really saw it with my own eyes between global corporations and the global governing community. And then that was in 2015. And then something happened the next year. And
Cubs won the World Series.
The Cubs won the World Series, and something also almost as rare: Donald Trump got elected president. Somebody who was not on board with all this was elected president. And what I found funny reading that Bank of America press release was that, all of that talk just went away. When Trump was elected, they didn't talk about the Great Reset anymore, at least, not out loud. I mean, they were still working behind the scenes, but all the talk about that stuff went out the window. This whole ESG stuff was very much underground because Trump came in and did things like, I think I want to make America the world energy leader. And we're going to basically disrupt all these plans you're making by opening up the United States for fracking. And so we became the world's leading producer of energy, and it completely screwed up all of their plans. And so they all just stayed quiet for 4 years. And guess what? And they worked as well to get the bad orange man out of the White House so that Biden could go in there and like, boom, just like that, literally overnight. All the press releases come out. All the talk is the same as it was, as if 4 years, didn't happen. This was what would have been happening, what they expected to happen if Hillary Clinton was elected in 2016. Well, but she wasn't, and so. But now that they have their man in the White House, all of this is back on. And in fact, what you notice, what's alarming about when you read these stories and you see the press releases and you listen to them talk, is that I think they know that they kind of were lollygagging a little too much last time, and they need to move fast, really fast. So when Bank of America and all these enormous corporations are basically implementing right now at warp speed the plans for the Great Reset, they want to make it so that they're so far down the road that they can't be turned back anymore. And that's why all this is happening so fast, and it's actually kind of scary.
Yeah, a couple of things about that. One, you're right about the Trump thing. Justin, you were telling me about how like one of the first things that Trump did was put in some rule about how like corporations had to worry first and foremost about their bottom line and not get involved in all of these different things, right?
Well, that was actually toward the end, unfortunately.
Oh, it was the first thing that Biden got rid of.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, there was a regulatory rule put in place by the Trump administration that said that the financial industry, I don't remember exactly the specific wording, I don't have it in front of me, but essentially what it said is the financial industry has to focus on financial information when they are evaluating whether they're going to, give loans or whatever to XYZ business. And then what Joe Biden did is he came into place and he said, nope, we're going to get rid of that. And they got rid of it right away. It was like one of the first things they did. And so the reason why that's important is because if that rule is in place, then Bank of America cannot issue the press release that we just showed, where they said that they're going to, make sure that they have net zero, carbon dioxide emissions in their financial services or whatever the wording was of that. Why couldn't they? Well, if you can't evaluate companies based on that, when you're giving them loans or whatever, you have to evaluate them based on their financial numbers only, then you can't say, well, you guys produce too much CO2 emissions, so we're not going to give you a loan. But now they can. So why would Joe Biden take that rule out of place? Why would he say, you know what, I want banks to be able to say, you don't have enough whatever in your company. It has nothing to do with money. You don't have enough, you have too much CO2 emissions. Therefore, we're not giving you a loan. Even though you're an incredibly wealthy company, even though you're very efficient, even though you're very effective, even though we know you'll pay back your loan, we don't care. You could be doing business with us for 100 years. You've never missed a payment. Doesn't matter. You guys have too much CO2 emissions in your supply chain. So get out of here.
Right.
That rule, why would you get rid of that rule on day one? Because it mattered to somebody in the Biden administration that you get rid of that rule. So the Great Reset is impossible with that rule in place, at least in America. And so you had to get rid of it, and they did right away. And that tells you a lot about where this is all headed.
Well, a stockholder might ask, actually, by law, you have a fiduciary responsibility to maximize my profits as a stockholder. But what we're seeing, what the Great Reset and the World Economic Forum and all this stuff is doing is it's making it unprofitable to operate as normal. I'm not even going to say like they used to, like normal. It's going to be unprofitable to pursue, a regular free market profit and to find the most efficient and best way ways to create your products, to distribute your products, or even the product itself will be determined by global governments as not, as not profitable. We're not going to allow you to make that because of your ESG score. It'll lower your ESG score, so you're going to get out of that. The distortion of the market here is so profound, and the more you think about it, the more worried you should get.
Yeah, I had in here a bunch of notes talking about how there's World Economic Forum actors that are trying to basically dethrone the U.S. dollar as a world reserve currency, and I've got a whole bunch of notes on that, but I'll save that for a future episode. It seems pretty dire, but we'll save it for a future episode. Let's end with a little bit more of maybe like some rays of hope. Maybe some green shoots or something with all of this. It seems like, we're talking about all this like doomsday type stuff happening, but there is some room to think that we still have time to make an impact here. Obviously, that's going to require a lot of action on our part and your part, anyone that's listening to this. But there is reason to believe that these people are actually a little worried about the coverage that we are giving it. So back when this originally started, like Justin, you probably remember this phone call. You called me up, asked me if I heard about this Great Reset thing. I said no. You read off like a dozen quotes of all of these people talking about the Great Reset, all obviously reading from the same playbook. And I remember saying, like, we should take this Great Reset thing, because it sounds so sinister and terrible, and just like shove it right back in their face, right? So we've been using the Great Reset, a term that they coined, against them as much as possible. And there's a couple of, and just like our coverage alone has definitely gotten the attention of some of these people. I won't go into specifics, but there was an article that Justin wrote that specifically got the attention of the World Economic Forum. We won't get into detail on that one. There's some Glenn Beck stuff that got some attention of some higher up people in some of these corporations that we were talking about. But it seems like the World Economic Forum is realizing that the Great Reset moniker that they've coined is sounds terrible and is not testing well with the general public. So I kid you not, this is a video that was produced by the World Economic Forum, and it kind of proves my point here. So let's play some of this.
Back to the status quo that you had before, simply because it was the status quo that got us here.
With everything falling apart, we can reshape the world in ways we couldn't before. Ways that better address so many of the challenges we face. And that's why so many are calling for a great reset. A great reset? That sounds more like buzzword bingo masking some nefarious plan for world domination.
Yep.
Hands up.
Yeah, now that you mention it.
This slogan hasn't gone down well.
We can pause it right there.
Is that we all
We admit this slogan hasn't gone down well. That's like the understatement of the century, man. They literally are producing a video explaining how this isn't some nefarious conspiracy. Yeah. And when you are like making a video, you're some international organization making a video like that, you can safely bet on the fact that it's the opposite of what they're trying to say. This is an international conspiracy. Like, by definition, this is a conspiracy.
Yeah. It is pretty incredible. And I want people to, people need to really think about this for a second. The people who are involved in this, like the board of trustees for the World Economic Forum, these people are incredibly, incredibly wealthy, and incredibly powerful and incredibly influential, right? And so when you have a disaster like this, when you have like just a full-blown disaster, PR disaster, it hurts all of these people in the worst conceivable way. And so you can just imagine how these people were feeling. It just give you a sense of this. Mark Benioff, billionaire CEO of Salesforce, Larry Fink, he's the head of BlackRock, which is one of the largest investment firms in the entire world. There's Al Gore is in on this. The head of the IMF is in on this. These are the people who are on the board of directors of this thing. You've got Jack Ma was involved in it for a long time. He's the head of Alibaba. People involved in government, all sorts of different people, right? So when this went bad PR wise, like the phone calls that these people were getting must have been brutal. Must have been absolutely brutal, because these people, the whole World Economic Forum system is all voluntary, corporations and investors and people like that who have joined, and they pay tons of money to be part of this elite club. And now the elite club is destroying their reputation. And you could just imagine how just furious these people were when this whole thing went down, especially after they all voluntarily went to these big events and spoke in favor of this and used the words Great Reset and said all this crap. So this is a PR disaster unlike any other PR disaster.
Yeah, I mean, there is some other good stuff in this video, but I want to they released a press release recently that notified everyone that they're pushing back their Davos conference, whatever you want to call it. And it was planned for what, like in January of this year, right? It was supposed to be January 2021.
Normally they hold it in January. Yeah.
And when that was first announced, they were talking about how this is all going to be about the Great Reset. Like everything was going to be about the Great Reset. And now they've had a couple of delays in this because of COVID and all of the different reasons for that. But the latest press release, they notified everyone that it's being pushed back to August. And in the press release, there is not one mention of the words Great Reset. And like, if that's not further proof that they're running away from this term. In fact, they're going to start calling it something else.
Yeah,
I predicted this so long ago that the first thing they were going to do is cut ties to the words Great Reset. And they're going to start calling it something else. My money is on inclusive capitalism. That's what I think they're going to call it.
Well, that would be the smart move, but that's not what they're going to call it. I know what they're going to call it. They've already named it, I think. It's Davos Agenda. That's
that's much better.
Oh, I know. I know.
At least it's not Davos Manifesto.
The January 2021, this where we're getting this video from, actually, that we've been playing here. This comes from an event that they did it was mostly, I think, a virtual event, and this is like the higher level people in January 2021. This was supposed to be around the time that they were going to do the Great Reset meeting, the big Great Reset annual Davos theme meeting, and instead they did this smaller virtual thing, and then they called it Davos Agenda 2021.
Yeah.
And so that to me signaled that's definitely it. Also, the previous year, the big theme was Davos Manifesto. They came up with a Davos Manifesto. So they're like doubling down on that whole idea. They've abandoned in between these two things, they came up with Great Reset. They did that for about 6 months. That died, a horrible death, and now they're back to Davos Agenda. And so I think that's what they're going to, but the press release that Donnie was just talking about, where they moved it to August, and they're going to hold it in Singapore, by the way, not in Davos, which is interesting in and of itself. But that doesn't talk about a theme really at all. Yeah. It essentially doesn't have a theme. They got rid of the theme. And so that in and of it's just incredible, because it always has a theme. There's always some kind of a theme. And now there's no theme because it went so badly the last time.
Yeah, and Justin, when I was listening to you on Glenn Beck last week or 2 weeks ago, whenever we were down there, you had brought up, and you came up with this on the spot, I think. You were saying that like the best comparison to like how we can fight back against this type of thing is kind of what happened with Common Core, right? Common Core was just like these buzzwords that everyone could unite against and not necessarily know exactly what it is. They just know they don't like it. And like the Great Reset, I think, could be this lightning rod of ire of your average day person to say, no, we don't want this. Like we absolutely don't want this. And just enough people just sounding their displeasure with this, abstract idea of the Great Reset could actually make some impacts. Like that's the green shoots. That's the little bit of hope that I kind of want to end this episode with.
The fact that we've had the World Economic Forum try to tear down articles that we've written, and the fact that we have had a company that I won't name that's worth hundreds of billions, not millions, billions of dollars, directly contact high-level, Glenn Beck and people like that to try to get him to change his talking points that we had been working with Glenn on. The fact that these people are paying attention to this degree, The fact that they're this concerned about it, the fact that they're going out of their way to try to stop this from happening and from people talking about it is evidence of the fact that they're scared to death of people talking about it.
Right.
Otherwise, they would just ignore it. We're just a bunch of tinfoil hat wearing crazy people. Why do they even talk to us? Why do they try to tear down our stuff? Why does it matter to them? Obviously, I think they're getting a lot of complaints from regular people. And I think that's why we're seeing this.
Let's watch and make fun of a little bit more of this video in the last minute that we've got here.
Yes, and fans of the movie They Live are going to love where we happen to have frozen it as well.
Yeah, right.
And as they say, if you're explaining, you're losing, and they're doing a lot of explaining here. But
right.
All have an opportunity to build a better world. And it's not surprising that people who've been disenfranchised by a broken system and pushed even further by the pandemic will suspect global leaders of conspiracy. But
Yes.
the world's not that simple.
Oh, thank
Every
you.
one of us has differing priorities, values, and ideas. That's part of why solutions are so hard to come by.
Yeah.
And why we all need to be involved in the decision making.
And they need to be
whether
top
it's
down.
Politicians, CEOs, academics, activists,
There, stop.
or you, we're all about.
Oh, there's Greta.
Look
Greta's
at
back on the good list.
Look at their awesome congregation of experts and global leaders.
For those who can't see, they while they're saying, oh, we're inviting everybody to this to help make the decisions, they put up on the screen this group of it's like photoshopped together of all these people who are supposedly the people who are making all these decisions, and they have some truly fantastic people up on the screen right now. We've got Greta's there. We've got Joe Biden. We've got George W. Bush is in the background. Bono's in the mix.
Yeah.
We got Angela Merkel over there on the right. We've got Al Gore. Pharrell is over there, the rapper. He's over there. We've got Putin. Even Putin's there. Vlad's in the mix. Like these are the people. These are the people who are the stakeholders, and everybody. These represent me. Do any of these people represent you guys? I don't know. I maybe this lady over here on the right, who I don't know with the glasses, maybe she represents me, or the left. Sorry, not the one in the middle. She definitely doesn't represent me.
You sure?
I don't know.
Yep.
Oh, it's we are
Ivanka's there too. Ivanka's there too. That's pretty.
Yeah,
funny.
she's the token. Her and George W. They're the token Republicans. They're the ones that are supposed to make me feel good.
Yeah.
One of them is a super rich person who grew up in Manhattan, and the other one was president of the United States from a legacy political establishment family. He went to Yale. These are the people who represent me, I guess.
Yeah, this is the big fight, man. This is the big fight. We could talk on previous episodes about like Dr. Seuss being canceled and all of that stuff, but these are all side attractions to this main event, which is the fight against the Great Reset. We've been covering it extensively, StoppingSocialism.com. There's a whole number of videos that we've done specifically on this podcast and previous episodes, but also in our Stopping Socialism TV channel on YouTube, so you could check those things out. Gentlemen, anything you want to get off your chest before we wrap up this episode? Hearing nothing, I will say...
I'll just recommend that it'll be in the show notes. Play this whole video about the Great Reset.
Yeah.
If it doesn't make you smile, then you're listening to the wrong podcast.
All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the In the Tank podcast. Join us every Friday for a new episode. If you like our show, please subscribe or review for us on iTunes. You can find us pretty much everywhere: Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube. Anywhere that you get your podcasts nowadays. You can send us your comments, suggestions, or questions by emailing us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Justin, where can the fine people find you?
At Justin T. Haskins on Facebook and Twitter. And
Parler. That's right. Jim Lakely, same question.
You can find me at J Lakely on Twitter. Also at Heartland Inst is the Heartland Institute's Twitter account. And always visit heartland.org.
Thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you next week.